I'm joined by James Creedon. Good evening to you, James.
Evening, Tom.
Let's start with, shall we, with a story that's very much in the news, has been for several weeks. The Islamic State Organisation. What do we call it? Some are calling it ISIS. We hear Washington today calling it ISIL. Others call it simply the Islamic State. What's the word on the street?
Well, it's certainly one that there isn't a huge amount of, I suppose, unity in terms of how to approach it, Tom. But, for example, the French Foreign Minister, Laurent Fabius, has been going recently with the Arabic acronym Daesh, which is essentially ISIS or ISIL, Islamic State in Syria and the Levant, or indeed Syria. It's the same acronym in Arabic, but apparently ISIS or ISIL or Islamic State or Daesh don't like to be called Daesh, because when you use the acronym DAESH, essentially it's a meaningless acronym in which the word Islamic is conflated into a simple letter, so it loses its meaning in some respects. And so they want the full words to be pronounced in using the title. And apparently there have been threats by militants in Mosul to cut out the tongue of anyone who publicly uses the acronym Daesh instead of referring to the group by its full name, because they think it shows defiance or disrespect, Tom. So it's interesting that there has been a bid by Laurent Fabius and others to basically what they don't want, to sort of implement that as the official use of the official appellation of the group. And indeed the French government, since a speech made by Laurent Fabius on the 10th of September, have sort of uniformly been using Daesh. And indeed you can see BFM TV and other French media have actually followed through and are now using that as the term. So it's essentially a way of countering Daesh, Islamic State Organisation propaganda. The terms that they want to be used are the terms that basically are not going to be used as far as many are concerned. And you can see here, indeed, this is the Arabic script Daesh, which is being, I suppose, used against them by, here it's being put into a sort of a swastika symbol, inferring fascism. Also, there's a lot of wordplay in the Arabic media too. Daesh sounds very close to Dahes, which means trample on. So you have all sorts of wordplay and negative, I suppose, spin being put on the acronym on Arabic social media. You can also see here this cartoon referring to the fact that indeed Islamic State, as they want to be known, there's nothing much true about it. There's nothing, it's not exactly in conformity with Islamic religious principles, and it's not a state either. So convert to Islam or die, says this cartoon. Well, you first, says a rather cheeky person there in that cartoon. So there you go, Tom. Certainly a lot of discussion in the media about how to approach that.
Okay, the social media is something you're always looking at, and of course each country has its own, well, a lot of countries have their own versions of Facebook and so on. Russia has one, and its biggest social network has just been bought by someone rather close to the president.
That's right, he is in fact Russia's richest man by Forbes magazine's calculations last year, at a wealth of 18.6 billion. His name is Alisher Usmanov. Now he was already he already owned quite a large stake in VKontakte, as it's known. It is the biggest social network in Russia with some, I think it's 120 million accounts, 270 million accounts rather. And in any case, it has now been bought up. A lot of people saying that the original owner, the founder indeed, Pavel Durov, he had to sell his 12% stake in January, Tom, and he fled Russia shortly afterwards, claiming that he sold his shares under pressure as the Russian intelligence agency FSB was trying to get VKontakte to disclose personal data of users linked to the protest movement in Ukraine. So there are fears that because of this ownership now, full ownership by somebody so close to Vladimir Putin, that it could indeed be politicized in terms of harvesting user data, etc.
Indeed, that's a concern in lots of other countries too.
Absolutely, similar accusations levelled at Facebook and other companies, that perhaps there's a fear that with so much data assembled together that it could be put to the wrong uses.
Absolutely. Well, someone seems to have been using the Vatican number plates in a rather abusive manner, because a car has been stopped here in France. It had Vatican number plates on it, and it also had in its cargo 4 kilograms of cocaine. Rather embarrassing.
That's right. French radio and French media have been looking looking at this story. The car was owned by an Argentinian Cardinal, Jorge Mejia. Now, he's retired since 2003, and he is bedridden indeed, so it's highly unlikely that the cargo had anything to do with him. And indeed, it is essentially the car was being looked after by two Italian men who were taking it for an annual checkup. They thought that perhaps by using the diplomatic plates that they might be able to get away with some illicit and illegal activities, crossing borders with what appears to be a cargo on board of cocaine and cannabis. In any case, the Vatican confirmed that the car was stopped in France with the drugs on board and stressed no staff were involved in the incident, but it did lead to headlines, of course, that were taking advantage of the fact that the car is owned by a cardinal and was full of cocaine.
Right, well, I expect the Pope is doing what he can to distance himself from that particular story. And finally, if you're a politician and you upset the crowds, you might get thrown in a skip. That's what happened to one unfortunate politician in Ukraine.
That's right, extraordinary pictures, and I suppose it's really deeply humiliating for Vitaly Zuraski. You can see here that this is outside the Parliament building in Kiev. I won't show you the entire video because it just goes on. He's squashed down into the bin, and tires are rubbed in his face and everything. It's deeply humiliating. And what has been a sort of metaphor for throwing out politicians, throwing them on the rubbish heap. It's hard to believe that this is actually it's something that has turned into an actual fact today, and many people alluding to that on social media. People in Ukraine have literally thrown a politician in the bin. What a time to be alive. And indeed others questioning that, saying that really it's quite uncalled for. But it did lead to an awful lot of headlines, I suppose, playing on the irony of the metaphor now turning into a real act. Rubbish day at the office. Ukrainian politician thrown in bin outside the parliament. Now, just to detail who he is, he was a member of ousted President Viktor Yanukovych's party. He was a pretty unpopular since January when he authored a bill severely tightening restrictions on anti-government protesters. So I suppose that made him unpopular with some of those people assembled outside the parliament in Kiev today. Tom.
Indeed, I don't think I'd like to be thrown in a skip. Thank you very much indeed for that Media Watch. That was James Green. Thank you very much indeed. Time now for Focus today, and once again, the deaths